Do you think they shouldn't have been put into conservatorship?
Well, they had to be put in. I mean, as I remember, the federal government only had like a $2.5 billion line or something. I mean, they had this little line, but all over the world, people assumed it was government paper. So now all of a sudden, something that is financed, all kinds of banks own their preferred stock. That happened to be, a big favorite with banks. It was non-cumulative preferred, incidentally. It was a very unusual instrument. But it would have said to the world that the United States has stopped. And the choice of how they did it, they didn't want to put their debt on the U.S. balance sheet. I mean, they didn't want to take them over. That's why they picked the conservatorship route. They didn't really want to take over the place.
So fast forward a little bit farther to that week. So Lehman files for bankruptcy. Bank of America is now sold to, or Bank of America buys Merrill Lynch. AIG gets rescued. And yet there's still serious anxiety that GE might go, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley.
Well, when Lehman goes, the big commercial paper holders were money market funds. All of those companies you're naming were borrowing in the commercial paper market. So you knew that pretty soon the reserve funds of the world and all those would be selling commercial paper instead of buying it. And there wasn't going to be anybody to buy commercial paper. I mean, there wasn't anybody to buy commercial paper. So, I mean, these things were just hitting one after another, and both Hank and Bernanke had to worry very much about the congressional reaction to anything they did. Congress really didn't get it. George Bush got it. I give him great credit. I didn't vote for him, but I give him great credit for understanding just how big the problem was.
And you get a call later in the week about Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, that was that one. That week. Yeah, that was a Wednesday, I think.
So I think Byron calls you on Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday. They
do you remember that call?
Well, I remember the call. Yeah. When Goldman Sachs needs money, you'll remember it.
And what did you think?
I did think that we were in very good hands. Congress was the one that scared me. I thought we were in good hands at the Fed. I thought we were in good hands at the Treasury. I thought we were in good hands at the presidency. And I thought that there was Goldman Sachs was sound under any situation except if markets just totally were closed up. Anything creates discontinuity in markets. I mean, anything can happen then because you got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of contracts with derivatives on, with people on each side, and you don't know whether either guy's is going to be any good. So you can take anything but a stoppage. And I felt the Goldman was okay. I felt that I think the unsung hero of the whole thing, although it was a stupid thing to do, I think the unsung hero was Ken Lewis buying Merrill. I mean, Merrill would have been there on Monday morning. I think he got some fairness opinion that said it was okay to pay $30. I think he got it twice between Saturday at noon or something, and the deal getting announced on Sunday morning. Nobody knew what Merrill was worth at that time, but he got the fairness opinion. He said we'll pay whatever it was, $30 or thereabouts. It wouldn't have been worth 30 cents on Monday.
Big mistake then.
Well, it wasn't for the system. And incidentally, Merrill's worked out fine subsequently, but I mean, under the conditions that existed, on Monday morning, if Bank of America hadn't announced that purchase on Sunday, it wouldn't have just been Lehman. The second that Lehman would not have been, if they backed away from Lehman, they'd have to tell Merrill to stand on its own too, and bingo, bingo.
When you look back in retrospect, is there anything you wish that you had done that you didn't do? Any investments that you wish you could have made, given?
Well, I can look back on any week and come up with that. I mean, the situation, we'd have been better off, considerably better off at Berkshire if we waited 4 or 5 months to buy anything. I mean, the low was set in March, and it was much lower than that. I wrote that op-ed for the New York Times in late October. Well, it was right on a long-term basis, but it was way off for 3 or 4 months, 4 or 5 months at least.
And let me ask you one other thing, just about this goes to the domino thing a little bit. Was there ever a moment that you thought that the system would gum up so much that people, that we would be back in sort of a Great Depression, that there really would be red lines and people?
It could, if mishandled, it could have lasted quite a while. It wouldn't have lasted as long as them, but it would have really gummed things up. There's no question. They're already gummed up, but it would have. At some point, the government has to step in. When everybody in the world wants to deleverage, there's only one party that can leverage up. There's just one party, and if for some reason they don't do it, you've had it. In the economy, you walk down there with sell orders, homes, sell orders, stocks, sell orders of everything, and there is no buyer.
And when you look back now, is there a great lesson, you think, for the public, for new generations of people who are going to hopefully learn about and think about this crisis?
No, because the answer is people have always panicked. That's why they set up the Fed. We had all kinds of panics in this country in the 19th century, when people are fearful, it's instantaneous transmission to everyone else. I went to a party actually of a wealthy friend of mine sometime in September, and all of a sudden 50 people there, who owned their homes outright and everything else, but had a little money. All of a sudden, every single one of them, that's all they wanted to talk about, because when people are afraid, they are afraid. Confidence comes back one at a time, but fear is instantaneous. If there weren't an FDIC and you owned one bank in a small town, the only thing to do is hire a bunch of movie actors and have them get in line at the other bank. And you can put the other guy out of business. The only problem is it'll come over to you too, because as soon as they can't pay, then they'll all figure, well, I better get my money out of the other bank. Fear just spreads like nothing you've ever seen. And it doesn't make any difference how sophisticated people are, whether they've got PhDs or anything else. When they are afraid, they are afraid. I know a number of people that would surprise you who during that panic period subsequently, went right to gold and felt that nothing would be worth anything. And, people really, fear is extraordinary with most people. That's the advantage I've got. Frankly, it isn't IQ, but at all. But it's, I'm not going to get fearful about the United States over time.
Do you draw any parallel or connection between the crisis 10 years ago now and the politics of today and the distrust of institutions and governments? And
sure. People have long memories, just like they did after 1929. It took a long time. People, when they've experienced extreme fear, it sears something into them where they want to know who did it to them, and they correctly don't blame themselves. They're not supposed to be finance experts or anything. All they did was buy a house and lie a little bit on their loan application. Just figured it was going to go up, and then they'd refinance and so on. Who's going to blame anybody for that? So it will. It's still affecting. When I went to school at Columbia in 1950, we still saw in stock valuations and things like that, prices people would pay for businesses. We still saw the fear from 29, and you have to, the number of people in the stock market in 1929 compared to the people, the number of homeowners in 2008, there's no comparison. So this was deeper in that sense.
Where we are today, do you worry about another crisis?
Well, there'll be one sometime, but no, I don't worry about it in the least.
Because
I conduct myself so that if there's another crisis, I'll still be around. Berkshire will be in good shape.
But when you look around and to the extent you worry about anything for the country, if not yourself, what do you look around today and say, okay, I got to be anxious about that?
Well, I don't see big signs of anything now, but that's the nature of things early on. But asset appreciation draws in people that really don't know anything about the asset, and people start they start being interested in something because it's going up, not because they understand anything else, but the guy next door who they know is dumber than they are is getting rich, and they aren't, and their spouse is saying, can't you figure it out too? And I mean, it is so contagious. So that's a permanent part of the system. But in terms of the specific excesses, I don't see them now. No.
And just going back to one other thing you said, is there anyone to blame for the crisis? Because that's been also a political.
You can blame a lot of people for doing very foolish things, but I don't think anybody was. There's a certain number of people who are doing crooked things all the time, and to some extent they were attracted to the real estate market because the money was flowing so easily. I mean, when you can create a mortgage, in Bakersfield, California, and sell it to somebody in Norway, and then when you get these permutations of these things where you get one instrument that's dependent on another instrument. I made a calculation once on one security I saw that had been raided by the agencies, and I'd had to read 300,000 pages in order to understand both the primary security and then the ones that it was dependent on and so on. And it just gets, and nothing goes wrong for a while, so everybody gets used to doing it. It'll happen again.
It'll happen again.
But that's okay. I mean, you should conduct yourself so that you don't have to get killed by it. If you own a farm outright, if you own a business outright, in our case, the only thing we had to be sure that we did was we never owned commercial paper, and we've never owned it since.
Are we better prepared for another crisis? Do you look at either the regulations or?
That's an interesting question, because I've never read Dodd-Frank in its full 2,000 plus page. I've read little summaries. I have the impression, and I may be wrong on this, but I have the impression that it somewhat weakens the ability of the Fed to act promptly and unilaterally. And I would say that's a terrible mistake. Now, people get mad at how the Fed operates. I mean, they stick it in there because they're mad about what happened in the past, and then these guys have too much power, and they could print money. Well, it's a good thing they could print money because we needed money. So I think we could be better off in many respects for it. And like I said, I have not read it, but I have been told by people that have read it that it actually does not leave the Fed as powerful as before, and we need a powerful Fed. You may not like them, but they may do things that bother you, but you need somebody that, if this country with now 100 trillion of household wealth, with now 75 million plus, that it doesn't come to a stop because everybody's trying to deleverage.
In layman's terms, how devastating do you think it would have been for the economy if it had frozen up completely for the man on the street?
Well, anything that slows down the economy means you really aren't using our productive capacity to the extent we have it. I mean, the country is as rich as its output is every year. And if you do something that depresses output from its maximum possibilities, and there can be a lot of things you could do along that line, but this would be one on a very big scale. And anything you do that slows down the economy from its productive capacity, I mean, you basically have, you hurt people. Which people you hurt, who knows? But and then you've got to count on how political sentiment will react to that, and they're going to want to publish. They're going to want to punish the people who they think did it to them. They're going to want to punish Wall Street, rightly in many respects. They're going to want to punish big business. They're just going to want to punish somebody. I would too if my life got all messed up, because of something I didn't understand. I would be upset about it. And I'd vote for whoever promised me that I'll get the guys that did it to you.
In terms of just the sheer panic, for you, was there ever? I mean, you're not a panic kind of guy.
No, not a panic kind of guy.
But you took calls, I assume. Was there ever a moment in that week where you, either between everybody calling you or talking to you, thought, "Wow, this is"?
Well, I described it actually on CNBC as an economic Pearl Harbor. That's not a term I've ever used before. So I mean, I was using. I felt it was something different than I'd ever seen. And I felt it was actually worse than 29 in a sense, in terms of the immediate panic that was induced. In 1929, if you remember, in September 29, the Dow hit a high of 381. Then it collapsed in the fall. But I was born August 30th, 1930, and it was back up to 250 something by that point. I mean, it didn't hit that many people. It hit everybody on Wall Street, but Wall Street wasn't as broad then remotely as it is now, with 401ks or whatever it may be. So this homes, that touches everybody.
Before you, I don't know if you had thought about it before you said it, but when you thought about describing it as an economic Pearl Harbor, how did you?
I just meant that the country had had a blow of an economic sort that was really equivalent to the blow we suffered at the time of Pearl Harbor. I mean, we had been hit in a way that 99.5% of the people thought couldn't happen, and Congress thought couldn't happen, and that they'd never seen the world try and deleverage trillions and trillions and trillions, and Fannie and Freddie, they're no good. Now the government says it's going to stand behind them, but you're in trouble when that sort of thing starts happening, and that it's going to be the auto industry, it's going to be everything, and if you get the first TARP did not pass, as you know, and that I still couldn't believe it would continue that way. But if you were inclined to be afraid of anything, that would be the time to be afraid.
Let me ask you one other question, which is, how often did you get calls from Hank Paulson?
Not very often. No, practically very few times, and never. They later on, Bernanke called me, but I was not getting a lot of calls. I got one call at the time of Wells Fargo when they wanted that reintroduced, and I got one or two other interesting calls, but I had no calls with the President of the United States, for example, and I didn't. I mean, the pressure that Hank was under was incredible. I did get a call. I was at the Virginia Tech Nebraska football game. It was a night football game in late September, and when they sought me out at the stadium to say there was a phone call coming from Washington I should take, I figured this is getting pretty serious by that point. That may have been about the Pearl Harbor time.
Who called?
It was a senator that wanted help on persuading Hank that they should stick in any bill limitations on bankers' salaries. I mean, they wanted to punish bankers, basically.
What did you think about that, by the way, when they were doing TARP?
Well, I thought TARP, and I actually on October 1st of 2008, I was on a Charlie Rose program where they were still talking about TARP applying to buying distressed assets from banks, and I actually suggested an RFC, Reconstruction Finance Corp model, which came from the 1930s. As a matter of fact, Katharine Graham of the Washington Post's father was the first head of the RFC. Believe it or not, he was appointed by Hoover, and then but then Roosevelt came along and put Jesse Jones in charge, and the RFC was very, very, very helpful in terms of putting the economy together again at that time. And in effect, that's what was done about 2 weeks later. But at that time, it wasn't being talked about, and I don't know what went on at that time, but it may have been that the Treasury didn't feel that Congress would accept anything that extreme, although it wouldn't have been that extreme in terms of historical precedent.